I do really value Morgan's preaching. In fact, if you were here last week, you'll recall that he spoke on church culture. And he encouraged us to be watchmen, watch people, to ensure that the culture of the church is preserved versus the culture of the world. That we are to stand firm in our convictions in what we know as the truth and not allow the culture to influence what is coming into the church. And I, for one, am very grateful that we have a pastor who is aware of those things and holds as a priority the theology and the interest and the concern for what is coming into our church from the culture, right? Two people are very happy about that. And I often say, the quieter you are, the longer I go. And usually someone makes a lot of noise at that point. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that. And it is an interesting time that we live in, because we live in a world of unbelief. So we come into the four walls of our church and we're very comfortable. We can have conversations that we would feel comfortable having about theological things and Christian things and all of the things that we talk about at church. But when we step outside these four walls, it's a different world. And when we are confronted by this culture of unbelief, it can cause some confusion. And sometimes it's people that we encounter they're kind of apathetic to faith. But other times there is this culture of unbelief that is very willful. It is extremely confrontational. It's people who have no interest in knowing about faith or Christianity or who Jesus is. And again, it can cause a little bit of confusion for us. We have conversations with people that we hoped had gone a better way. Maybe we hadn't glorified ourselves in a conversation that we had. We hadn't done a great job of that. We go away disappointed. We kind of hoped that we would have found some sort of scripture that we could have pulled out of our minds to end an argument or a discussion, but it doesn't always happen that way. And this morning I want to provide some perspective to prepare us for living in this culture of unbelief, and make no bones about the fact that we will at times be rejected for what we say. However, we want to take these opportunities to connect with people, to genuinely show the love of Christ. And we want to do that without getting sidetracked by arguments that actually no one's going to win, because an unbelieving culture doesn't always care about the truth or the facts or what really we are saying. And that can help us prevent these arguments that no one wins. It can help us to deal a little bit better with some family squabbles or hurt feelings that we have. And it can also help us to prevent disagreement that can have very negative outcomes. So fundamentally, we are living in a culture of unbelief. In 2020, so that's a really recent poll, Gallup found that US church membership has fallen for the first time below the majority of the population. So 47% of US adults have some kind of affiliation to what they call churches. But a deeper dive into that research shows that churches in that research included synagogues and mosques. So we are living in an unbelieving culture. And I think we've obviously believed that for some time. And the reason for this steady decline in that survey was that Americans have an increasing situation where they have no religious preference. And of course, Jesus himself was the subject of unbelief. We see in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus was amazed by the unbelief of people, that there were certain things he was not unable to do when he tried to heal people. Such was the unbelief of the people, he could only lay hands on a few sick people. People saw the signs and wonders of Jesus, yet they rejected him as the Messiah. They had unbelief. And in fact, some of his messages were so difficult for them to grasp that some who once believed fell away and no longer believed. We saw the disciple Thomas, who needed to actually physically see and touch Jesus, the risen Christ, before he would believe. And it says that Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believed." And in many cases, that unbelief was a total rejection of Jesus as the Messiah. There were some that said he was a prophet, some that said he was a holy man, but those who had unbelief rejected him as Christ. And there was no greater group that had this willful, defiant, strongly held unbelief than the Pharisees. And we see in John chapter 9, we see a miracle take place. And following that miracle, we see the aftermath of this very strongly held unbelief that the Pharisees had as they begin to look into Jesus' healing of a man on the Sabbath. And so I want to look at the hallmarks of unbelief, the elements of what that looks like, because sadly, like those who rejected Christ in the Bible, our culture is trending towards a greater degree of unbelief that we need to be aware of, that when we're out and about sharing the gospel, we've got to understand what we are dealing with. So in John chapter 9, we see the healing of a blind man. It's one of the more well-known miracles where Jesus spits on the ground. He makes mud, rubs it in the man's eyes who was born blind. So he is a man born blind. Jesus rubs the mud on his eyes, tells him to go and wash, which he does. And for the first time in his life, he can now see. And what follows gives us insight into how perverse an unbelieving culture can be. Because there is absolutely no way that the Pharisees will accept that the healing of this man can be attributed to the Son of Man. There's no way that they believe that Jesus is sent from heaven because he has healed this man. But the reason for that is because he healed him on the Sabbath. So, after John chapter 5 tells us that after he had healed another man, that the Pharisees were plotting to kill him. So, John 5:18 tells us, this was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And John 7 tells us when the Pharisees wanted to go and arrest Jesus. So they sent the temple guards to do just that. But they were so amazed at Jesus' teaching that they told him, no one's ever spoken like this. They were in two minds as to whether or not they should arrest him and bring him before the Pharisees. And this is the extent of the unbelief of those Pharisees when it came to Jesus. They replied in John 7:47-49, the Pharisees answered them, have you also been deceived? have any of the authorities or the Pharisees believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is cursed. So essentially they're saying, we have the absolute authority to know exactly who Jesus Christ is. Any other entertaining of him being the Messiah was absolutely abhorrent to them. And they made many other accusations against Jesus. They said that he was demon-possessed, that he was not from God, that he was satanic, all manner of horrible things, that he was insane. So our first point today is that an unbelieving culture is adversarial. It's aggressive. Now, not all unbelievers are adversarial, but willful unbelief by its very foundation is. The kind of absolute objection to the gospel, the unbelieving nature of that is adversarial. So when an opposing view to the gospel is taken, when people willfully reject Christ, they take such a firm position of unbelief that they are adversarial. And you may have already begun to kind of experience this in our culture. It's actually the reason that Christians all around the world are persecuted, that Christians are killed in other countries. It's the type of unbelief that Saul, the Pharisee of Pharisees, had in his heart when he looked on at the stoning of Stephen. Now, of course, not all unbelief leads to murder, but don't be fooled. It is absolutely founded in the rejection of the gospel and is aggressive and combative. And it's one of the reasons that Christians in our culture today are being marginalized. It's why there is an aggressive movement to replace Christian values and virtues in our society with stuff that really is literally incredibly confusing. Some of the stuff that we endure in our culture today, it absolutely confuses me. We don't watch a ton of network TV, but I was watching some of the Olympics recently, and some of the commercials, I realized how out of touch I had become with some of the commercials that I was seeing. And I don't need to go into them, but this is a very in-your-face type of unbelief. It is absolutely adversarial. So we're going to jump into John 9, starting in chapter 13, which says, "Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him." So this is the man's neighbors. And that word "took" comes from a Greek word that implies that he's been somehow induced to be persuaded to come. So we don't know if he was dragged in front of the Pharisees, but certainly there was some persuasion to take him in front of the Pharisees. And I think we can assume from the fact that it's noted here that they healed him on the Sabbath, that the reason they were bringing him there was punitive. It was kind of to help form this idea that Jesus had done something that was criminal and bring this guy to find out what's really going on. Now, the Sabbath, of course, as we know, was full of these man-made rules. In chapter 5, when Jesus heals a man, he tells that man, "You've been healed, pick up your mat and walk." Now, the big deal with the Pharisees there wasn't necessarily the fact that he was healed, which was a problem, but it was the fact he told him to pick up his mat and carry it. Because in the Mishnah, which is part of the Talmud, the rabbinic law, we see these 39 forbidden categories of work. And so the Pharisees decided that you couldn't carry anything during the Sabbath. Then they would get into these endless debates that maybe you could carry something, and okay, if you can carry it, it can't be too heavy, can't be too burdensome. So they decided that you could carry something as long as it weighed no more than a dried fig. And if it weighed half the weight of a dried fig, you could carry it twice. When he said go and walk, that would be also potentially forbidden because there was limits on how far people could walk on the Sabbath. You couldn't carry instruments of work. So a tailor could not carry a needle for fear that he may be tempted to mend someone's clothes. So you can see how ridiculous this is, that all of these man-made rules are causing the Pharisees to basically deny the fact that Jesus is the Christ because he did something on the Sabbath. And we remember that Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that's a really big deal to the Pharisees because he has violated the Sabbath. So then the Pharisees then asked the man about the healing, and the Pharisees asked the man, so he told them, he put the mud over my eyes, and then I washed it away and I could see. It's very clear, it's very simple. Here is a man giving testimony in front of the scribes and lawyers of the day, basically saying, he put mud on me and now I see. But the Pharisees, they're not interested in any other testimony. Like, this is a significant healing. Never in the Old Testament had there been a man who was blind or a woman who was blind healed of their blindness. So this has created an incredible buzz amongst the neighbors and the community. A lot of information is going on, but they don't want to hear from anyone else. They only want to hear from this man. Because if they can discredit him, if they can tear down his testimony, they can fit the story into their construct that this man is not from God. And we know there were some who saw signs and wonders and believed. So we assume that some people were looking at this as a divine happening. But the Pharisees, they don't want to know it. They don't want to entertain it. They want to speak only to the man. So some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God. He is working on the Sabbath. And that's the only thing that they will hang their hats on as the argument to why Jesus is not from God. See, when you are at the police academy, one of the things they tell you is when you go to investigate a crime, you follow the evidence, the facts. You don't push the evidence into creating an outcome. But they have already said Jesus is demon-possessed. They've already called him insane. They've already said that he's from Satan. Now they're saying there's no way. They've drawn this conclusion well before they've begun to investigate. They teach you that even though you speak to someone, a victim or a witness, it's easy to pick up the facts and a testimony from one person, create a conclusion in your mind, and work backwards from there. And this is what they're doing. The belief of the Pharisees was fixed. They said, basically, we have a real issue with this guy. We've already said he's insane. Now we say he doesn't keep the Sabbath, therefore he can't be from God. And this is what an unbelieving culture does. It's combative. It seeks to fit the victim into its own artificial construct. And if anyone attempts to persuade or provide truth or facts from their own conclusions, it becomes aggressive. If there's disagreement to that narrative or another opinion, it becomes aggressive. And we need to understand this, that these things occur because of the hostility that sometimes just the name of Jesus and the gospel attracts. Because if we don't expect that, or if we don't appreciate that that is going to happen, we tend to withdraw. We tend to have conversations at work that go something like this. Oh, what did you do on Sunday? I hung out with a few people. Well, what did you do? Yeah, I just met and spoke to a few people at somewhere I went to. Even if, let's pretend that Morgan's up here this morning and he provided this amazing sermon. You go to work on Monday and you really want to share it because there's some incredible truth. Or someone confides in you that they're having an issue and something from that sermon would be perfect for that person, but we withdraw. Because willful, strongly held unbelief causes us to back off, when really we have light to bring into a situation. So moving on, others said, but how can an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? And now it talks that there's this really deep division amongst the Pharisees, with some saying that because he healed on the Sabbath, he's absolutely a sinner, he's not from God, while others are just, I don't know, this is interesting. No one has ever opened the eyes of a blind man before. This is kind of sounds like it's from God. But we don't hear anything more from that group. From these people, we hear nothing more. It's again this aggressive narrative that keeps going through as we go through the scripture this morning. If you've ever been in a meeting, in fact, someone encouraged me this week to go and look at a congregational meeting at a church where there was a great division, but the guy with the microphone prevailed. The person with the loudest voice was the one that prevailed. So I can almost imagine here that we've got this really curious group over here who are just being drowned out by this hostile, aggressive, adversarial group that shuts them down and does not want to entertain the fact that Jesus could be from God. And that's going to move us to our next point, which is an unbelieving culture will not be reasoned with. Will not be reasoned with. Verse 17 says, then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, what's your opinion about this man? Who healed you? And the man replied, I think he must be a prophet. Okay, so we've had the neighbors attesting to the fact that this guy was once blind. We've now had his own testimony, and now they're wanting to know more. And he says, I was once blind, now I see. Now the evidence is still moving towards this other group over here that is curious. We have a group of Pharisees that absolutely believe the miracle happened, and they're entertaining the idea that Jesus could be from God. But we see that an insistent, unbelieving culture claims to want to know the truth, but when it's presented, it completely discards it. It carries this insatiable desire to keep wanting more and more evidence, but only if it fits with what they believe. And what we're seeing is a lot of activity, a lot of questions, but with the intention not to understand, but to smear. They don't really want to know, but because things are kind of leaning this way, they're trying to thrust out things to discredit this man. And it's almost like if the sum of all of the information that they can put in this box is just confusing enough, chaotic enough to try and convince everyone else what their opinion is. So the man states he's a prophet. Now remember, here is a man born blind who is really, for want of a better phrase, at the bottom of the food chain. He's a beggar, which is how he makes his life. He would not have been a part of traditional everyday synagogue life because his blindness would have been considered a curse. Because the Pharisees believed that disability or blindness was a result of sin. Possibly, and we see this earlier in the chapter when the disciples are asking Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus totally discredits that theology, but what we're seeing is a man who is akin to perhaps someone downtown Modesto that you may drive past, lying on a bus shelter, saying, I think this man is a prophet. He has enough sense to put that together where you would think these learned, educated Pharisees would at least be able to, at least by now, be questioning what really is the source of the healing, who Jesus really is. But they're so blinded by the fact that he healed a man on the Sabbath, which contradicted their man-made rules, that they just can't be reasoned with. In verse 18, the Jewish leaders still refuse to believe the man. At this point, they're still not believing the man was blind after half the town's probably talking about it. He's given his evidence. They still don't believe that he was blind. So they called for his parents and they asked them, is this your son? Was he born blind? If so, how now does he see? And so here we go again. They want information they're not really interested in the truth. They want to keep gathering information until it lines up with what they believe. And they don't believe anything unless it fits their story, that Jesus is a sinner, that he can't be from God. And it's as if they are looking for some reason to prove that the healing was some kind of circus trick, or it's some sort of attempt to just create a whole lot of confusion around what's going on. In verse 20 it says, his parents replied, we know this is our son and that he was born blind. Okay, so now we have the neighbors, we have the man himself twice, we now have his parents stating that he was born blind. You would think there would be some questioning around that. Then they say, but we don't know how he can see or who healed him. So let's get this straight. Your kid's blind, but you've got no idea how he's now started to see. So all the pain, all the compassion, all of the care that you've given this man as a blind child all the way up to adulthood, you've got no idea how this happened. A conversation has not taken place between you and your son, who now sees. Hard to believe, right? Now, this is all happening over time. This is not, so Jesus has healed the man on the Sabbath. It's still not the Sabbath because they would not have convened during this time. So we're talking probably a few days between the time the miracle happens and the time that this is happening. But here's the thing. When you have an adversarial, unbelieving culture and you have a culture that can't be reasoned with, people tell lies because they're scared. As silly as that seems, that they don't know how this happened, they fear man more than they do God. They fear the consequence of affirming Jesus to the point where they're making themselves look foolish to say, we don't know, yeah, this is our son, but we have no idea how it happened. So then they say, ask him how old, he's old enough to speak for himself. His parents said that because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. They were afraid and fearful of the unbelieving culture that they lived in. So the Jewish leaders had announced that anyone saying Jesus was the Messiah would be expelled from the synagogue, and that's why they said, he is old enough, ask him. Man, if there is anyone you should be able to rely on to have your back, it should be your mum and dad, right? Now, they knew what it was like to be excluded from the synagogue because this son, who they apparently never speak to, he was excluded from the synagogue. So it's almost like they would say, well, we'll stay. He doesn't really know any better. He's already kind of on the outside. We'll leave it at that. And the Bible commentator Gary Burge tells us about the three kind of expulsions from the synagogue that would take place. The first one was like a 7 to 30 days. And for more serious situations, you'd have more than 30 days up to maybe a couple of years. And then there was a total excommunication. So they feared what might happen to them if they affirmed that Jesus had healed this man. And verse 24 says, so for the second time they called in the man who had been born blind and told him, God should get the glory for this because we know this man, Jesus, is a sinner. So they bring him in again. Everything I've heard to this point, it really means nothing. In some regards, it's a kangaroo court. It's just going through the motions because we've already reached our conclusion. It doesn't matter what the fact says. It doesn't matter what the evidence is. You can't reason with us. And when we take this scripture here where it says God should get the glory, or some translations say give God the glory, in our little cross-reference system in our Bibles, in the middle of our Bibles, we see that this is a reference to Joshua 7:19, where God gives the Israelites the city of Jericho. He gives Jericho into the hands of the Israelites, but he gives them very descriptive and important direction around the plunder of the city. So Achan covets some of the gold and silver that is taken from the conquest of Jericho. He hides it in his tent. And when God says that Israel has sinned against me because of what Achan has done, Joshua confronts him. And before he questions him, Joshua says to Achan, give God the glory, tell me what you have done. So essentially they're saying, if you tell me the truth, God will be glorified. And this is what the Pharisees are now saying to this man. They're saying to him, give God glory, tell us the truth, tell us what really happened. The neighbors can't be telling me the truth here because even though they say you are the man that was born blind, we don't care. Your testimony means nothing to us. Your parents who have confirmed that you're blind and now you see means nothing. Because again, if they were to acknowledge this would confirm that Jesus would have been from God and would give him legitimacy. It would give him the very thing that they feared, which was the lack of control of the people. So, they've determined he's a sinner, and it doesn't matter. No amount of reasoning, no amount of evidence. Verse 25, the man says, I don't know if he's a sinner, but I know this. I was blind, now I can see. That's it in a nutshell right there. And then they say, but what did he do? They asked, how did he heal you? He's already told them. Again, it's insatiable. It's a constant. Okay, how did it happen? What did he do? What's going on? And because of all of that, because of all that's wrapped up in here, another point is that an unbelieving culture reaches its own wrong conclusions. It reaches its own wrong conclusions. And again, I want to labor on that point that we need to be aware of this, because unless we accept that it's adversarial, that it can't be reasoned with, and that it reaches its own wrong conclusions, that it rejects the gospel, our daily lives are really super difficult and confusing. Because our culture today is now making what was right, it's making it wrong. And now it's taking what was wrong and making it right. And it's all festered around an idea that we know what's best, we're going to tell you how things run. And we don't want to find ourselves in a place of feeling like there's no hope, or we're confused, or that we're kind of having to batten down the hatches and just hang out in the four walls of this church. We are commissioned to go and make disciples. We are directed to go and be light in the world. But here's a 21st century example of what I mean. How do you feel about boys and girls being raised to choose their own gender? So the biblical view is that God created man, he created Eve to be a helper, that there's distinct and wonderful differences between the roles, the biology, the emotions of men and of women. But an unbelieving culture doesn't look from a biblical perspective. It says, okay, I'm going to let my kid, Johnny, play with trucks this week. I'll let him play with dolls next week, and he'll be able to figure out how that goes for him. What do you say to someone, and I don't have the answer to this, running out of time. What do you say to someone at work who mentions that? More than likely, you kind of look the other way and carry on, and then have about 10-minute conversation with your colleague. Hey, did you know what? Or here's another one. In the absence of truth, an unbelieving culture finds its own conclusions. Let's say championing the rights of women. We want to give women athletic scholarships so that they can go to college. Now, no one would disagree with it. That's a good idea. Women should have the opportunity to get athletic scholarships, do the best they can. For some women, it's the only chance they will get to go to school if they get an athletic scholarship. So we say that. And on the other hand, we say, but if a person born biologically as a man also wants to run in a 100-meter race with girls, that's fine too. Right? There's no reasoning. You just reach these weird, mutually exclusive conclusions when you're so narrow and unbelieving. It's adversarial if you don't agree because you're a bigot. There's no reasoning with you because you just don't see my point of view. What we say and the conclusions that we've made, you better get on board with, because this is happening. So we need to be confident in the truth of who Jesus is and who we are in him. Verse 27, look, the man exclaimed, I told you once. Didn't you listen? Why do you want to hear it again? I mean, is the guy, at this point, think about this. You've been blind your whole life. Now you see, shouldn't that be the most joyous week of your life? But you're held to account. What happened? This is what happened. No, it didn't. Yes, it did. And this is awesome. He asks them, do you want to become his disciples too? That is a super bold statement right there. Then they cursed him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from. No, then they don't. They don't know where he comes from, that's true. But they concluded very early that he isn't from heaven. And the result of that wrong conclusion, they crucified an innocent man. An unbelieving culture is ultimately a cancel culture. Why, that's very strange, the man replied. He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it. And that is the truth of the matter, a bold declaration from a guy who's just, his world has just opened up in front of him. And this is the outcome of conviction centered in truth, that he can stand there and smoke them. And here's their canceling. You were born a total sinner. Are you trying to teach us? Are you trying to teach us? And they threw him out of the synagogue. The culmination of the unbelieving culture, its adversarial nature, its lacking of reason, its wrong conclusions, it ultimately has no response to the truth, logic and reasoning. It has no response. If you don't agree, you're out. But the irony of this, and this I think is so cool, the irony of this is that is the best thing that happened to that guy. Because at the end of the chapter, he's thrown out of the synagogue and Jesus hears about it. And he goes looking for him. Can you imagine that? I'm an absolute social outcast in an unbelieving culture. I'm the guy that no one wants to be around because I've been thrown out of the synagogue. I can't do business. All my social interactions are going to be hopeless. Look at me. I'm out of the synagogue. Jesus comes looking for him. asks him, do you know who the Son of Man is? He says, no, but I want to know. Jesus tells him, I am the Son of Man. Immediately he goes and worships Jesus. And that is the ultimate conclusion for a curious, believing heart. But this is the thing, man. This is the thing, everyone. We have to remember that it is God who brings people to repentance. When we have conversations with people that we think, that sucked. If only I had said this. Don't beat yourself up. There's just going to be a natural adversarial nature to some people that don't want to know. But Paul, or Saul the Pharisee of Pharisees, what if you had to go and speak to him? The guy who was present at the stoning of Stephen, the man who would throw out murderous threats about Christians, the persecutor, meets Jesus on the road to Damascus. What does Jesus do? He blinds him. He blinds him. Scales on his eyes. Physically blind, like our friend, the blind beggar. Then there's a man named Ananias. God says to him, go to Straight Street. There you'll find a man named Saul. Lay hands on him. Now, Charles Swindoll, the Bible teacher, akins that command to Ananias as a Jewish man in the early 1930s going to pray for Adolf Hitler. Ananias says, hang on, God, I've heard these things about this dude. I'm not going there. And in the Bible it says, go with an exclamation mark. You get there, Ananias, because there's a guy waiting to see. So he goes, he lays hands on him. Things like scales fell from his eyes. Our role is to be obedient. No matter how scary it might be. No matter how adversarial it might be. No matter how much we think, my mother and father, I can't reason with them. My teenage son, I can't reason with him. My co-workers reach the wrong conclusions all the time. This feels hopeless. Our role is to be obedient. See if I invite the worship team up. Is to be obedient, to do what God asks us to do, to realize that it is the Holy Spirit that draws man to God. That sometimes no amount of persuasion, no amount of reasoning, no amount of really cool scriptures are going to do the thing that we really want to have happen. But, finally, I was once part of the unbelieving culture. You were once part of the unbelieving culture. And thankfully someone prayed for us. Thankfully someone shared the gospel with us. And then God did the rest. Amen.